The Collapse video series is for entertainment purposes only. Do not commit acts of violence. "30 days since the collapse. The situation seems hopeless to the masses walking out of the suburbs to find food. They don't know where they are going to go or what they are going to do. Their feet are battered and blistered from walking for days. There are no showers. They smell bad. They have been sleeping on the bare ground with no blankets or pillows. They haven't eaten since the suburbs ran out of food 2 weeks ago. Typhoid fever, spread by unsanitary conditions, has further ravaged their diminishing health. It is widely known that it takes about 30 days to die of starvation. But the person's strength is not constant for those 30 days. He gets progressively weaker every day without food. After 2 weeks, he can barely walk. The hordes can go no more than about 100 miles from their starting point in the suburbs. They don't have the strength. They find a place to rest and wait for death. It won't take another 2 weeks for them to die of starvation. They are now too weak to collect water, and there is no one to bring them water. Already thirsty, exhausted, and ill, they succumb to dehydration quickly. Within the next few days, over 200 million people in the United States and Canada, over 50% of the population, will have died since the collapse. Gangs in the cities have faced the fact that it is getting increasingly difficult to find non-perishable foods in the abandoned urban houses and apartments. They are tired of hauling water from city rivers and boiling it. They are leaving the cities to find resources elsewhere. Unlike the suburbanites, the gangs are not bringing children or elderly who might slow them down. But what really makes them different from the suburban hordes is their willingness to engage in depraved violence to get what they want. They arrive in the suburbs to find a handful of people still alive and suspect a few of them have hidden away food, which they have. The gangs break into homes and take people hostage, threatening to kill the person the next day if the town does not come up with some food for the gangs. Sometimes this works, and those with remaining food stores hand them over in exchange for the hostage. Sometimes it doesn't work because there really is no more food. The hostages are then killed and the gangs move on to the next town. There is not enough food left in the suburbs for the gangs to thrive, but there is enough to keep them alive and moving outward towards the countryside. In the Caribbean, where unemployment hit 25% after the tourism industry collapsed along with the global economy, tens of thousands pile into boats headed for the United States. They've heard that things are bad in the US, but they presume that bad in the US is still better than what they are leaving. As the boats approach the coast of the US, they are intercepted by the US Navy, which tells them to turn around. They try to evade the Navy ships, but the US Navy is no longer worried about condemnation for their actions. They sink the boats. Other ships see this happen and choose to turn around. Every now and then, a risk-taking human trafficker will try to get a boat through, telling himself that a small boat will not be picked up by Navy radar. They are wrong. The Navy sinks every one. Mexico continues to destabilize. It was hit by the global economic collapse like everyone else, plus it lost its largest trading partner, the United States. Mexico normally exports a quarter of its GDP to the US. The loss of those exports is economically devastating. This comes on top of the entrance of 3 million refugees from the United States, mostly Mexican citizens who had been residing in the U.S. either legally or illegally, plus ethnic Mexicans born in the U.S. who had relatives in Mexico, and other Latinos living near the border. The Mexican government has completely stopped funding the temporary refugee camps along the border, but provided some assistance to those attempting to get to their families in Mexico. Some were welcomed with open arms by family they hadn't seen in many years. Others located their distant relatives only to be turned away. Mexicans who had just lost their jobs in the global economic collapse and were having trouble feeding their children were unwilling to take in a cousin they had never met before. More were turned away than were taken in. When the refugees did not have enough food and water, they stole out of necessity. The Central Americans have been attempting to pass through, headed south, but in the depressed economy, they've been unable to convince locals to donate food to them during their journey. The clashes between residents and migrants that started in the north have spread throughout the country. The police are trying to quell the violence. The clashes are interfering with business, further damaging the economy. The Protector's initiative to repatriate the entire economic supply chain is working, but his advisors warn that it might take months for the program to bring down the unemployment rate. He begins a massive government hiring program. The pan-European government will put everyone to work. There is infrastructure to build, streets to clean, and communities to improve. If there are no public works projects to assign people to, they can be hired into the military and police. The plan is that as demand for employees increases in the private sector, public sector employees will be smoothly transferred over from short-term projects. This will put everyone back to work immediately. Unemployment drops down to nearly 0% very quickly. The people feel relief as the economy seems to have recovered. Business is almost back to normal at restaurants and shops as people have paychecks to spend. The crime rate decreases to below pre-collapse levels. A large portion of the public is starting to believe the collapse was a blessing. They think with the Protector in charge, making decisions quickly, they may actually be better off now than they were before. The Protector follows modern monetary theory, which is the idea that a sovereign power can never run out of money because it can print its own. If it uses that money to tap into the unused resources of society, especially labor that is not being used due to unemployment, then it improves the economy of society as a whole. Real wealth is created when resources are maximized and people are working. During economic bad times, modern monetary theory makes a lot of sense. However, it only works when labor and resources are not being maximized. When the market is already as maximized as it can be in a given time constraint, or when the money is not being used to maximize resources, an influx of government dollars only serves to dilute the money already in the economy. This results in high levels of inflation, including hyperinflation, which can destroy an economy. But at least for now, the influx of government dollars is helping. Public support for the Protector soars. The blockade of Israel by Arab nations has been going on for 2 weeks. While the Arab countries are preventing ships from bringing in supplies, operatives within Israel are burning fields, poisoning sheep, and engaging in other acts of sabotage against the food supply. Since Israel normally produces 95% of its own food, it is the sabotage within the country that is having the greater impact, though the blockade is what's preventing the country from importing to make up for what's been lost. They are not starving yet, but everyone is eating less. They are going to bed with a rumbling stomach. The Israeli government decides to send Navy ships to escort ships with food. This works at first. The Arab countries don't want to directly engage the Israeli Navy ships. Instead, they send spies to learn who is selling the food to the Israelis. They quietly tell the food sellers not to sell to Israel, or they will face repercussions. Since the food can fetch a high price from any number of countries on the global market, the food sellers don't want to get involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now Israel finds it difficult to find anyone willing to sell them food. In the Pacific, China's blockade of Taiwan has been going on for a week. The government of Australia seized on the blockade to give it a moral pretext for economic sanctions. In the period immediately following the collapse, these pretexts are no longer necessary, but that has not sunk into the world yet. Australia quickly declares that no goods, including no agricultural goods, may be shipped to China until China ends the blockade of Taiwan. Warehouses of non-perishable foods have already been emptied out by the time this edict is issued, but at least the crops on the ground now will not go to China. Vladimir Putin has been waiting for the dust to settle before making his next move. Now that a month has passed, he decides it is time to act. He invades Ukraine. He wants Ukraine because of its vast farmland. Due to the climate, Russia is barely able to produce enough food to feed its people. Russia isn't starving, but Ukraine would make a profound difference in Russia's food security. Russia was already engaging in some conflict with Ukraine, but was not using all of the resources it could use. Putin was holding back due to the possibility of what other nations, especially the United States, might do in response. Now Putin is free to conquer with little or no international consequences. That's not to say that Ukraine is giving up without a fight. The war begins in earnest. The war interferes with food production in Ukraine. If you would like to see an ad-free version of these videos, go to my BitChute or Brighteon page. Even with the ads, there is not nearly enough revenue to support continued production of the series. Please consider supporting me on Subscribestar or click on the PayPal link in the description.